This is how we did it. And when I was about 5 years old, I'm sitting in my grandmother's church, and we're in communion. And I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be something more to it than this. Even at 5 years old, I could figure out that something was missing. And so as I grew older, I started going, again, bouncing from church to church, Protestant church to Protestant church, and trying to find the answers. Looking everywhere desperately for the answers. And then, finally, one day, I started kneeling and praying during communion, asking God, please help me to figure this out. I don't understand, why. What's going on? Why do I not understand this? Everyone else is doing it this way. Why do I not understand this? So then one day, some people moved in next door to us, and my names are Chester and Lisa. They quickly became our very best friends in the whole wide world. And the problem with this relationship, though, was that they were Catholic and we were Protestant. So basically, we had to agree that we weren't going to talk about religion. We could be friends, but we can't talk about religion. Because for me, growing up as a Protestant, I was raised anti-Catholic. And what that means is, basically, during family gatherings, my aunts and uncles and grandparents and such would all sit around talking about how the Catholics, they worship Mary, and the Catholics do this, and the Catholics do that, and the Catholics are going to hell. When you're 5 and 6 and 7 years old, you hear your family talking like this, you figure, they're adults, they know, right? So you buy into it. You don't question it. You don't question whether they actually know what they're talking about or not. So, as I'm growing up and growing older and continuing my search, one day my very best friend, who lives right next door to me, says, hey, I'm pregnant with my second child. And I just found out that he has pleural effusions in his heart. And basically what that means is that her baby had fluid gathering in his heart. He had a 5% chance to survive the pregnancy, to make it all the way full term. And he had a 1% chance of a 5% chance that he would live a few hours after birth. Now, even if he did live, he would be severely mentally handicapped and physically handicapped. So she was pretty scared. And she says, would you come to Mass with me and pray with me? And I said, yeah, sure. Because if I go to Mass with you, surely you'll have to agree to come to Mass or to church with me in my Protestant church. And then I can show you how wrong you are, and I can save you from your Catholic faith. You won't have to go to hell. So I was pretty excited at the prospect. So we go to Mass. This is my very first Mass experience in my whole life. And I walk into Mass, and the very first thing I see is the baptismal font. And then right beyond the baptismal font, I see an altar. Now, in the Protestant churches, in most Protestant churches, there is no altar. So that was new for me. And then the incense, I'm smelling the incense, and the bells are ringing, and I'm looking around, and there's all these statues of all these saints. And for me, walking in to my very first Mass, I knew from the Old Testament how God wanted us to worship Him. And so when I walked in, it was the very first time that I ever saw a church where they worshiped God the way that He asked them to. And I was overwhelmed. So then I go in and we have a seat and get a little bit distracted with the stand up, sit down, kneel down, stand up. That was all new for me. We don't do that in a Protestant church. So I get a little bit distracted. And then the guy at the front there by the altar, he's talking about the Last Supper and such. And then he takes this piece of bread and he holds up a cup and he says the words, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world." And for me and my husband, in that moment, I realized that the calling in my heart had finally been answered. And I wasn't too happy that it was being answered in the Catholic Church. And I wasn't about to become Catholic without a fight. So I had to go back and I had to ask myself to the beginning, who's Jesus? And why should I care if he's in the Eucharist? So I knew from the Bible that Jesus was the Paschal Lamb. But I wasn't really clear on what the Paschal Lamb actually meant. So going back and looking at what that actually means, we go back 3,500 years ago, and the Hebrews are enslaved in Egypt. And God sends Moses. You guys know this story. God sends Moses, let my people go. Pharaoh says, no way. Right? 10 plagues. Right? Plague after plague after plague after plague. Seriously, let my people go. And Pharaoh says no each and every time. Until the 10th plague. The 10th plague is known as death of the firstborn child. Now, what that actually meant was that everybody in Egypt, the Hebrews and the Egyptians alike, every firstborn, man, woman, child, old, middle-aged, whatever, if you are firstborn in your household, you are dead. But the great thing is that God gave Moses a way out. Here's how to save them. And he's really, really specific when he tells Moses. He says, you gotta go and get a pure, spotless lamb. We all know this, right? And you gotta kill it. You gotta spread its blood over the door lintel. And you gotta eat it. Now, the interesting thing is that most of us remember the part about killing the lamb and spreading its blood over the door lintel. But a lot of us forget the part where God says you gotta eat the lamb to be saved from the angel of death. Now, this became known as Passover. Passover is the longest running observance in all of human history. So something really important happened there at that time. Now, then I had to fast forward 1,500 years into the future when Jesus is born. Now, Jesus is born in a town called Bethlehem. Now, Bethlehem actually translates to house of bread. So I think God might be trying to tell us something there. Then, Mary places Jesus in a manger. That's a place where food is eaten. We might catch a clue there. And then Jesus goes on to fulfill every single prophecy ever made of the Messiah. And it's Jesus himself who institutes the Eucharist. And he says that my blood is the blood of the new and everlasting covenant. Well, that got my attention. I'd heard about covenants. I knew about covenants, sort of. I mean, God made a bunch of them, right? Made one with Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David. What happened to those covenants? Where are they now? They're gone. They're broken. Broken by man. So Jesus comes to give us a new and everlasting covenant. Well, what does that mean? In the Old Testament, covenants were made by two people. It's an agreement between two people. We're an agreement between God and his people. And what they would do is they would take an animal. They like to do this a lot. Take an animal, cut it in half, place one half of the animal on one side, another half of the animal of the other side, and the two people who were trying to make this agreement, they would walk through the blood together. And that's the sign of their agreement. So the only way that Jesus could come and make an everlasting agreement, one that can never be broken, is for him to actually become man. For him to become the Paschal Lamb. And for he himself to walk through the sacrificial blood himself. He's the only one capable of making an everlasting, unbreakable covenant with you, with us, his people.